I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. Is it time to lose faith in America's economy, or do we have a prayer lawmakers will reach a deal on the debt? Plus, a new California law requiring public schools to teach about the contributions of homosexual Americans gets an F grade from its opponents. And Brooklyn celebrates the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Williamsburg.
The parish is named after Our Lady under the title of Mount Carmel, so we spend this day with several masses, inviting the faithful to come and rejoice in who we are and in all the good that God's done for us through the Blessed Mother.
Well, good evening, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. Progress continues to evade politicians on Capitol Hill as the back and forth on raising the nation's debt limit moves to yet another day. At issue is President Barack Obama's still holding out hope now that there can be a grand deal on a possible deficit reduction. And the Republican answer to the president's hope is a smaller scale plan. The proposal, widely known as the Cut, Cap, and Balance Plan, is now under consideration, and CNN's Candy Crowley has more from our nation's capital.
Cut, cap, and balance gets us out of debt over a long period of time.
Cut, a substantial amount of spending to bring down the roughly $1.5 trillion deficit expected this year. Cap, federal spending at 18% of gross domestic product. It's at 24% of GDP now. Pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that includes spending caps and makes it difficult to raise federal taxes. Cut, cap, and balance, CCB, is all the rage in some Republican quarters.
The answer for the country is for the president to agree to cut federal spending, to cap federal spending, and to put in place a balanced budget amendment.
House will be in order.
This week, the Republican-controlled House will likely pass a cut, cap, and balance bill as a prerequisite to raising the debt ceiling. There are mighty objections from Democrats on the Hill and in the White House.
What these amendments do is not just say you have to balance the budget, but it puts in place spending limitations that would force us to cut Social Security and Medicare more deeply than even the House budget resolution.
What the House will almost surely approve, the Senate almost surely will not, leaving the debt ceiling issue precisely where it's been for months, unresolved.
If you cannot get the Senate to pass what the House surely will this week, you will allow the U.S. to go in default, or you will go to a Plan B?
I'm going to focus on Plan A. That, to me, is the only plan that will work. It's the real deal, not a big deal.
The most probable deal, still in the works, would cut spending by $1.5 trillion over 10 years and let the president raise the debt ceiling through the 2012 election. Congress could stop him, but only in the unlikely event of a veto-proof majority vote in both houses. Everybody gets off the hook, and it avoids economic chaos.
At the end of the day, Republican leaders have made it clear that we will not be the ones who put the government into default.
It's uncertain whether Republican rank and file will follow their leaders. The idea comes from Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell, who has been trashed by conservatives ever since.
We're in big trouble, so let's have that national debate, not some cop-out like the McConnell plan.
Sources say the last-ditch McConnell plan could be on the Senate floor this week.
But a Republican source believes before the McConnell bill, the Senate will take up cut, cap, and balance, because even if CCB doesn't pass, it has endless possibilities as a CBS campaign bumper sticker.
Well, that was CNN's Candy Crowley reporting. Well, up next, another hot-button item in the news. California passes a law requiring public schools to teach about the contributions of homosexual Americans in history. I'll speak to Ned DeLacy. He's the executive director of the California Catholic Conference, and he believes this has less to do with education and more to do with indoctrination, perhaps. We'll have that interview coming up next. Welcome back. Well, the ink had barely dried on California Governor Jerry Brown's signature on the landmark law requiring public schools in his state to teach about the contributions of homosexual Americans before the law's opponents put the wheels into motion to bring it to a statewide vote that would hopefully overturn that controversial law. The law's opponents dispute supporters' claims that the mandatory history lessons would provide students with a more accurate view of American history. Opponents do say that the law would actually teach children to accept homosexuality. Well, joining me now on the phone to discuss the law and all the legal wrangling in its aftermath is Ned DeLacy. He's the executive director of the California Catholic Conference. Ned, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Matt.
Well, what are the issues that the Catholic Conference has with this law?
Well, we have, we've argued, made 3 or 4 points consistently throughout the journey of SB 48. Our first has been that politicians aren't historians, and we don't need further micromanaging of the history and the curricula of the state of California public schools by politicians. Obviously, there's a process in place right now which is very respectful of the expertise of historians, of teachers, and of school boards and parents within the process, both for the creation of the content and the adoption process in the state of California. And one more time, the politicians felt the need to serve the interests of special groups and decided to micromanage the process of California. And as we move forward, of course, historical significance of people's contributions, if their sexual orientation is germane to it, will be dealt with by the historians. But we don't need an attempt right now to troll through history and find out the sexual orientation of various people, and then as a way to put them into the textbooks of the California public schools.
Sure. And what about the argument on the other side that part of this is to curb potential bullying in schools, which is obviously, that's been something that's been making the headlines here lately, with a lot of students who tragically either committed suicide or have just been very traumatized by some schoolyard bullying, especially homosexuals. What do you make of the argument on the other side that this would help curb that?
Well, there's certainly, great empathy, and no one should be, bullied or discriminated against, based on their sexual orientation. And the state of California has dealt with that in a variety of ways over the last number of years. And there are currently, policies, procedures, and practices on the books and in place to address those particular realities. If they're not being used, then the legislature should not use this as a smokescreen to move into the curricula. They should use this as an opportunity to reflect on, are the laws and the practice and the policies being reviewed with appropriate people who are implementing them, and if found wanting, where should they be fixed? It's also interesting that in the State Board of Education reported statistics, the most reported statistic on bullying is girl-on-girl bullying at all ages, and is not necessarily, based on sexual orientation. In fact, the second largest reported incidence of bullying is around racial issues that arise on various campuses in California. So, I think while there's great empathy and we need to address the concerns of bullying, this particular bill is not the way to do it.
Sure. And I'm sure people on the other side of the issue as well, from yourself, would also say that, well, this is really kind of no different than maybe, teaching African American history or women's history in classrooms. What does the Catholic Conference say to that argument?
Well, there's not an attempt in this bill per se to move to, teaching, gay history or gay and lesbian history. This is an attempt to make sure that that the accomplishments of gay and lesbian folks are included, which no one, I think, is going to disagree with. I think where the Catholic Conference moved into it, it was around the somewhat vague language about adversely reflects as it applies to the behavior of teachers, as it applies to supplemental materials, as it applies to textbooks. That rather vague legal language will cause all sorts of confusion in terms of, how a student or a parent perceives the teaching style or the teaching content or the actual content of particular books and curriculum is being used. And there was a request for more precise language and more specificity around this, but that was rejected, and that has led other people to believe that this, is really much more about, promoting homosexuality as a positive within the public school curricula than it is about whether or not we all get along and we find a way to be tolerant and respectful.
Sure. And one more question here for you, Ned, before we have to wrap it up. Tell me a little bit about the effort to bring this up to a vote of the people. Is the Catholic Conference involved in that effort at all?
We are not involved in that effort. I think the intentions of the people who would like to do that are good, in the sense that they would like to, pursue a more respectful arrangement between the public schools and the parents and the teachers in this society. But I'm not sure what we would achieve. I don't see that it's particularly well organized yet at this moment, and I'm not sure, whether there's a specific target of what we would be trying to accomplish in a game plan to get from here to there, but we'll see it as it evolves.
All right. Well, Ned DeLacy, the Executive Director of the California Catholic Conference. Ned, thanks so much for joining us here today on Currents. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, stay with us. New York ex-New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani warns the GOP to show a little bit of RESPECT for people's privacy or risk losing the White House. We'll have that story, plus the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, the streets of Williamsburg were jumping this weekend as an annual feast wrapped up. But first, let's have a look at today's headlines. A second town clerk in upstate New York has stepped down over her opposition to same-sex marriage. Ruth Sheldon, the town clerk for Granby, said that the law legalizing same-sex marriage violates her conscience and faith. Meanwhile, another upstate town clerk says she will remain in her job but will no longer officiate weddings. Rosemary Senti, the clerk for Guilderland, New York, also has served as the town's marriage officer there, but she says that she cannot marry same-sex couples because of her Catholic faith. And the National Organization for Marriage is sponsoring rallies at 4 cities on the day that the law goes into effect. Those rallies will take place at 3 p.m. July 24th in Manhattan, Albany, in Rochester, and also in Buffalo. The goal is to demand that New York's voters be allowed to decide the issue. Meanwhile, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the Republican Party should be focusing efforts away from same-sex marriage and toward other issues.
I think that marriage should be between a man and woman, but I think that the Republican Party would be well advised to get the heck out of people's bedrooms and let these things get decided by states. And the reality is that this is something that New York decided by a Democratic vote. I think it's wrong, but there are other things that I think are wrong that get decided by Democratic vote.
Giuliani spoke on CNN's State of the Union during a visit to New Hampshire. He's considered a possible contender for the GOP presidential nomination in 2012. Well, a federal appeals court has temporarily reinstated the U.S. military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy after a request from the Obama administration. The reinstatement will allow the Department of Defense to continue transitioning out the policy, which prohibits openly homosexual service members from serving in the military in an orderly manner. Now, in its ruling, the appeals court prohibited the military from dismissing anyone under the policy. Well, in other news on the election front, GOP presidential candidate Herman Cain says communities in the U.S. have the right to ban mosques. Appearing on Fox News Sunday, the former Godfather's Pizza CEO says banning mosques is not a form of religious discrimination because it's not just a religious issue. He claims Muslims are trying to institute Sharia law. Cain supports residents in one Tennessee town, the town of Murfreesboro. They're protesting there a proposed mosque, saying the people in that community know what's best. A spokesman for the Council on American Islamic Relations called Cain's remarks unconstitutional and un-American. Well, China is voicing its opposition to a meeting this weekend between President Obama and the Dalai Lama. The two met at the White House for close to 45 minutes over the weekend, Obama reportedly commending the Dalai Lama for his commitment to nonviolence. According to the White House, according to a statement released by the White House, Obama stressed the U.S. policy that Tibet is part of China and that the U.S. does not support independence for Tibet. But a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the meeting hurt the feelings of the Chinese people and harmed relations between the U.S. and China. Well, meanwhile, the Vatican has confirmed that a bishop ordained in China last week without the Holy See's approval was automatically excommunicated. In a statement, the Vatican says Pope Benedict deplores the way the church is being treated in China. In the statement, the Holy See said Catholics in China have a right to act freely, follow their conscience, and remain faithful. Well, meanwhile, the Vatican has Pope Benedict praying for drought victims in the Horn of Africa. He did that during his weekly Angelus prayer. Rome Reports has those details.
The Pope said a prayer for those in need and expressed his solidarity with them. He also urged the international community to help in solving the problem.
Innumerevoli persone stanno fuggendo da quella tremenda carestia in cerca di cibo e di aiuti. Auspico che cresca la mobilitazione internazionale per inviare tempestivamente soccorsi a questi nostri fratelli e sorelle già duramente provati, tra cui vi sono tanti bambini.
During the Angelus, Benedict XVI explained a parable by Jesus on the kingdom of heaven and how to live with faith.
Gesù paragona il regno dei cieli ad un campo di grano per farci comprendere che dentro di noi è seminato qualcosa di piccolo e nascosto, che tuttavia possiede un'insopprimibile forza vitale. Malgrado tutti gli ostacoli, il seme si svilupperà e il frutto maturerà.
Benedict XVI delivered the Angelus from his summer residence in Castel Gandolfo.
8 organizations have said the drought is the worst in 60 years. Well, a columnist in the UK who famously called for the Pope's arrest last year is now being investigated for plagiarism. Johann Hari is accused of taking quotes from other sources and presenting them as statements made to him in interviews. Hari defended that practice, saying he interviewed people but sometimes substituted a clearer passage from a different source. Last year, Hari was one of the leaders of a Protest the Pope rally in London. And parishes in southern New Jersey are on the lookout after vandals destroyed and damaged statues at 5 churches in the region. The Philadelphia Inquirer reports that at one church, an 8-foot-tall statue of Mary was broken into 3 pieces. Meanwhile, 33 statues at another church were damaged. According to police, the hands of some of the figures were knocked off. Well, stay with us. There is more Currents coming up. When we return, Brooklyn's bishop takes part in a big-time celebration in Williamsburg.
We pray that Mary will take us to the mountain which is Christ the Lord. Not just the Mount of Carmel, but the mount which is Jesus, Jesus himself.
And finally tonight, whether you call her Nuestra Señora del Carmen, Notre Dame du Mont Carmel, or Our Lady of Mount Carmel, devotees and disciples of this popular incarnation of the Blessed Virgin Mary gathered together all around the world to commemorate the feast day of Our Lady this weekend. And in Brooklyn, right here in the heart of the city of immigrants, it seemed as if people from all corners of the world were filing into the pews of the Shrine Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, this past Saturday, for a mass capped off by a solemn procession.
She continually brings us countless graces. And that is why we are here today, to obtain through Mary's intercession under the title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel the graces we need to do what is necessary in our own lives.
Well, Lady of Mount Carmel is a wonderful devotion to Our Lady. It's a very ancient one. It comes right from the Old Testament, from the Mount Carmel, where Elijah was the prophet, and where Elijah prophesied for God, and where hermits started to live. And we know that she was revealed to St. Simon Stock in the 16th century and promised that those who would wear the scapular would be saved from final damnation if they were faithful to her devotion, if they were living a good life, and if they wore the scapular at all times.
Either as a medal or as cloth, it is a sign of the promises that Mary made to St. Simon Stock, that those who would wear this wonderful garment would be preserved from eternal damnation.
The parish is named after Our Lady under the title of Mount Carmel, so we spend this day with several masses, inviting the faithful to come and rejoice in who we are and in all the good that God's done for us through the Blessed Mother. And then we take that to the streets. There are so many people who'd like to be with us who can't because they're shut in because of age, or who just couldn't come out because of the weather. So once we've celebrated the Eucharist at the table, we go out into the streets and we just bring a message of the joy that the Blessed Mother brings to the people of the neighborhood.
I've been going every year. I never miss it. I miss 1 year, but I've been coming here every year.
My mother made a vow that when my brothers were born, both brothers passed away. My mother says, keep my next boy healthy, and I'll walk in the feast every year on your feast day.
It's a festival, it's a neighborhood thing, it's a real New York thing. You don't get that in Colorado.
It was wonderful that Bishop DiMarzio chose to walk the procession this year instead of riding on the float, because that gave him the opportunity to go right up to the homes and right up to some of these people that were coming out to greet us. These are people who normally would have come to the church, but either because of age or sickness or because they have newborn children in the house, they just didn't want to take the trip out. So we bring the statue of the Blessed Mother to those who can't come to her in pilgrimage.
We remember Our Lady today, and we ask her to intercede for us, to obtain the forgiveness of our sins, to obtain the graces we need, to obtain the healing that some of us need for physical and also psychological difficulties. Mary is powerful. We honor her, and we ask her intercession, we, her children, who need her so much.
Well, such a unique feast and such a great celebration of it every year in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. You know, they also do the Dance of the Giglio as well, and they did that last weekend, and then they had sort of, you know, things going on every night all last week, and then wrapped it up over the weekend this week. But I'll tell you what, it is a wonderful, wonderful celebration that happens each and every year. And the lady was right. You don't find things like that in Colorado. It's a very New York thing to do. It's all good. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents, but make sure and join us tomorrow, all right? There is a brand new radio station on the dial, and it is all about Mary. Yes, that very same Mary. We'll tell you all about it. But until then, be sure to visit us online over at currentsny.net. You can go there to watch selected reports and full broadcasts of the show. You can also friend us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. On Twitter, our handle is @currentsny. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching tonight, and we leave you now with more scenes from this weekend's Our Lady of Mount Carmel Mass and Procession. Have a good night.